Yeah, welcome in. Good morning out there, wherever you are. Maybe part of the world where it's afternoon. You'd have to go a couple hours ahead. So I'll let Matt Gajewski do the math here. I was just told I'm here to bring in and out and not do heavy lifting like finding out time zones and things along those lines. Mike's producing. So the three of us are here, and we have actually, dare I say, some fun primetime football to get to. Matty, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great, man. Excited for this Cowboys-Seahawks game.
Yeah.
My first inclination was maybe Seattle would be able to keep this within the spread, and I hope we get that, man. I don't know if I have the stomach for another primetime blowout spot where Dallas just beats down an opponent. So I'm hoping Geno can at least revive some early season magic and keep this within the 9.5 point spread, 10-point spread in some spots.
Yeah, this thing exploded, right? It definitely moved up a little bit from a line standpoint. So we'll see what we can get. And I think a lot of us collectively here, and it's not just Mike and I and Philly, you know, the homers or you just rooting against Dallas and anybody else out there that has I think to Matt's point, we are beaten down with, at least on the schedule, looking at the shitty primetime games that we've had in front of us and trying to determine and figure out, you know, where are we going to go? We just had one. We just talked about Monday night where, thank you, your Bears get the job done, Matt. But my God, could there be an uglier way or fashion in which, so I feel like we've gone through the gauntlet almost, and this is our reward. And watch it be 48-2.
It could be. I mean, a 10-point spread's not really inspiring a lot of confidence. And yeah, my Bears getting it done without a touchdown. And Eytan, I would say if you've been disappointed with the last couple of primetime games, I would not glance forward in your calendar because you're going to find 3 New England Patriots primetime games in the next 3 or 4 weeks, something like that. So yeah, not ideal.
So I don't know the logistics of this. And again, if you're hanging with us, please hit the thumbs up button. Make sure you're subscribed across the board. Stochastic, Odd Shopper, more and more of you coming in will remind you about what's going on here, Underdog. And we're going to use our Sims tool. Of course, Mike's going to be showing you what we're doing here. But, you know, I do real quick. I do wonder if there could be a new shift. And again, I don't know the logistics of it as far as the days and how fast you have to get in, but they've already done this for Sunday Night Football. You would implement the Belichick rule, and it would hereon be known as the Belichick rule, which is no matter how or where a team is playing, even if it's flexing them from 1 o'clock to just like a 9:30 in some practice stadium, just remove the Patriots, because it's not all Sunday Night Football that you're laying out there, right? They're in prime time elsewhere. You got to flex the Patriots. You can't force the Patriots in an island game anymore, Matt. It's awful.
Right. I mean, so you know this as well as I do. They do this for money. They try to pick the best games at the beginning of the year.
Sure.
Sometimes they're screwed when like an Aaron Rodgers goes down and you have a ton of Jets primetime games. But at the same time, I wouldn't be surprised to see them do this in the future, just from a monetary standpoint. You stand to gain more when you don't have teams like the Jets and the Patriots playing in primetime. And I don't know, the NFLPA is pretty weak when they negotiate things for the players. Obviously, the biggest, I guess, drawback would be the players don't know when they're playing. Fans don't know really how and when to buy tickets. But yeah, man, I don't see like the Players Association really pushing back on this. They are continually pushed over every time they have negotiations. So, I mean, wouldn't be surprised
Right.
at all to see this happen.
That's so true, too. I mean, you just go back down the list of all the issues that this league has had between player and owner and the rep. It's almost like bad advice they keep getting. All right, that's not what you're going to get here by any means. No bad advice from Matt. Maybe from me, but that's fine. We'll see. I have a couple of things that I liked on this slate that I was curious to get your thoughts on, not just from a DFS, but just a bigger picture from the betting standpoint. Look, let's look at the game itself, because the reality is if Geno Smith, if the health of this offense is not up to par and they're not getting a massive game in some sense of the receiving core, I imagine DK is going to be a guy that we'll talk about specific, but they're going to have to keep up. Otherwise, Dallas is going to score. Looks like they're going to be able to run, especially against Seattle. So is it really just coming down to Geno Smith, the health of him, and also this offense for you? Or can you find a way maybe in which this is we've seen the under hit a lot on these primetime games as well. So maybe it is just a slow week, a quick week turnaround for Dallas, and their offense just doesn't need to smash in order to still get away with a win.
Seattle's defense has impressed me at times. I know they just had the 31-13 loss to San Francisco, but that's arguably, a top 3 team. I would put them in the top 3 of the NFC. So, I mean, there's no shame in getting a beatdown loss to San Francisco or like Philly or whenever those occur in the NFC, but they've actually stood up well against reasonable opponents, middling opponents in the NFC. And Dallas, the chat's talking about this. They have played the easiest schedule in football.
Sure.
Early in the year, struggled a lot, and then have just been beating up on the weakest of teams of late. So they're a tough team to evaluate. If you want a quick glance at their box scores, you're going to see this wide disparity of blowout wins and then some ugly losses early in the season. So they're tricky to evaluate. Seattle kind of falls in the middle of the teams in the NFC where, what are we getting? I know the line is 9.5 points. Seattle's taking some money. I think Dallas is particularly hard to evaluate with the schedule they've played. So overall, I wouldn't be surprised to see an under. I've been impressed with some of the young players, especially in the secondary for Seattle, like Witherspoon. And then I'm just not sure what to make of the Dallas offense. Are we potentially overrating them? Maybe, but it's also pretty hard to discount Dak and CeeDee's recent play.
Right. So let's look at Dak here. And I think just always with the backdrop, we'll talk a little bit more about Geno when we come up. But we'll start with Seattle. I'm sorry. That's right. The road team. That would make sense. So let's look at Geno. I mean, look, we know that he's playing through, at the very least, the elbow, and just looking at the injury concern here. But as far as just the strategy of where, not necessarily how much, but where we put Geno Smith tonight, it's going to rotate between the captain and just rostering him, especially if you expect Seattle to cover this spread, just be involved in this football game. So where do you see your breakdown kind of lying, where it's Geno captain and Geno in the flex?
I'm having a hard time with Seattle right now, as I imagine a lot of people are, because just from a macro view of this slate, we do have value. There are players around $1,000, give or take a couple hundred, that you can slot into your lineup. So the studs are attainable, and at least 3 of them are. I built this morning. You can do lineups where you get 4 studs. Say you do like all 3 of the Dallas guys and a Seattle guy. But with this total and this spread, I find myself wanting more Dallas guys. So I'm debating, okay, which Seattle studs do we want to target? Do we want to target Geno, his expensive pass catchers? And I think right away the Seattle guys are going to come in under-owned. Geno, I think, especially after his poor play recently, I agree with you. I think it's largely due to injury, but he's 9,200. So he makes the other studs a little trickier to get. He's a player that can, sometimes he will just deliver the ball to one or a couple pass catchers, and you can easily see one of them outscore him because Geno doesn't give you anything on the ground either. So if DK Metcalf is the guy that catches the touchdown, I mean, Geno could easily be outscored. But for those reasons, I think he's going to be under-owned. I'd rather play him in the flex today, just with the ceiling of those elite Dallas players being so condensed, and Geno not having as many paths as, like, say, Lamar Jackson or Jalen Hurts to his ceiling. But I still want to play him. He touches the ball every single play. Again, I think Dallas has some vulnerabilities. I mean, it's going to be tough to really go all in on Geno. He's going to be like a mix and match flex play, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, the only negative, and again, he's definitely going to be rostered here, so this is not just as far as advocating remove him entirely, but there are going to be a couple of scenarios, I think, where you'll see Dallas's defense play and almost treat Seattle. I know that the back and forth here in the chat, which is great. We almost need a poll here about the Cowboys, if they're frauds or contenders, and see what people have to break. I mean, I know where I'd ask Mike to put that poll up, Matt, but it's going to come out so biased, like you'll be able to actually read it in Kelly Green. But seriously, I think there is a breakdown, or at least a disconnect between a lot of us as far as, their schedule versus how good they can be defensively. And we've seen this against worse teams. And I'm with you where Seattle is not that, but they can be, right? It's not, I don't think it's their DNA as far as their true identity, but we've seen sides of it. And that's where I wonder if you look at a scenario here where you are leaving Geno off and maybe getting to a spot where their offense just isn't able to move much outside of maybe one guy, and then that's just rostering to roster as opposed to really rushing for Geno. Like you said, you're going to get to him, but I wonder how many scenarios you really do see where Seattle is just suffocated by Dallas.
Yeah, and you bring up a great point. I think alternatives are going to be a little stronger. I did not run the Sims tool yet. I know Mike's probably already done this, and we'll talk about it later in the show. My first inclination is that Geno would be better for larger fields where you're playing, maybe this comes within the total, and maybe we see Seattle in an alternate game script with a lead at points in this game, and Geno has success. I think that stuff plays more in larger fields with the discrepancy in projections. So I imagine myself playing more Geno the larger the field, and it's still primarily going to be at flex, I think. I don't really want to forego any of these Dallas guys. I do think Geno will be contrarian in the captain, but even on the back end, like our top stacks tool is showing him positively leveraged in the flex versus the captain. He's coming in a little negatively leveraged. So I think that's going to be my approach right now. Obviously, things can change throughout the day, but as we get through Seattle, we'll find some price tags that are a little more affordable on some of the skill position players.
All right, we'll move around here and look at a couple of other guys. And look, news God, I had to. This thing was I was telling Matt ahead of time, the beard was becoming a hindrance in my life. Like it's now. Look, this is the worst possible look because I look like a fat kid who's gone through that simulation aging AI program. It would be like, I look like a 14-year-old fat kid who's been put through this aging process, and there, the bags and all that. So it's not a good look, Matt, but it's only going to be for like a day and a half, and then I'll have some scrubble like you.
Yeah, man. I think the worst part of shaving is that first day or two where you have the baby face again.
Yeah, it's awful.
Unless you like the clean cut look, some guys do, but I shave once a week, so you got like 1 or 2 days of that look, and the rest of it's fine. But then you run into the second problem, which is like that weird itchy area after like a week or so, where I find myself shaving again.
That's the indicator there. Yeah, I look like a fat leopard right now. This is not good by any means. All right,
leopard catching strays.
Well, at least I'm the after. It's not like he's the before, Matt. So I'm, it could be worse. I could have swapped it around there. All right, so let's look at Seattle and just running the Sims as well as what Mike's going to put up there. Outside of Geno, we start to move around, and the running back position is going to be interesting here, especially because what you think you may be able to get over against Dallas's defense. So I'm curious to see, speaking about the passing game in a second, where the running game kind of fits for you for Seattle.
I think this is a price play, and I'm scared of this. Last week, I think we saw a very similar situation with the 49ers game, where 49ers are very strong up front, but we have Kenneth Walker out. He's doubtful today, so I'm not anticipating seeing him. And then you've got Charbonnet underpriced for the workload he's going to get, but can we get even a semblance of efficiency? And that doesn't necessarily have to mean like yards per carry, but can we get him in the end zone? Can we get anything where Charbonnet pays off this price tag? Because last week he was just kind of okay, despite having a workload that, a lot of running backs would love to have in this league. So again, I'm running into the opportunity cost thing where I do want to play Charbonnet. I think he makes sense at his price, but man, are we even going to get any efficiency from him in this matchup? So I think like Geno, he's going to be another guy I mix and match for tournaments, largely in the flex, and use him as just a piece of Seattle as I try to jam in the Cowboys players more or less. He's really tricky, man. He might be the trickiest player on Seattle because of that inefficiency.
Yeah, and there's nobody else really that you can feel comfortable pivoting to on top of that. It's either going to be game flow or not for him, for really that position, I feel like.
Yeah, I think you're right. Charbonnet is a good pass catcher, but we've just seen him fall out of games. And weirdly, they've used DJ Dallas as sort of a third down back at times, which I don't know why they do that. I think Charbonnet would be much better in that role. Maybe they're just trying to give him a breather at some point, but like the DJ Dallas snaps are really annoying to me. I hope they stop doing that. Last week was actually pretty positive. Like Charbonnet played 49 of 56 snaps. DJ Dallas only had 7. But we've seen Dallas play more snaps than he should on multiple occasions. So it's always like in the back of my head where Is Pete Carroll going to give DJ Dallas extra snaps this game? So that's at least a concern. I think it's positive that he didn't do that against the 49ers. And this is a very competitive game. I think it would behoove him to take the same approach and just double down on the Charbonnet workload.
Is that the best wrestler name in the NFL? DJ Dallas? I know it's like Dallas Diamond Page. Maybe that's why. And I'm showing my age as I try to stay younger. But I love that. Yeah. All right. So Dallas. Okay. Let's just get to the pass catchers here, especially because a lot of people are anticipating, even with the spread, that Seattle's going to be down. Seattle's going to need to throw here. And, you can start as far as where our Sims tool at least lies. And it's really just a matter of identifying any other value, right, outside of Lockett and Metcalf, who are going to have some negative ROI simply because of ownership, I imagine, right? So it's these two guys, and then there's the gap as far as strategy is concerned.
I think it's going to come down to pricing for Seattle. Just because we have the Dallas favored by so much, you're going to want to jam those guys. They just have higher touchdown expectations, and they're really condensed. We'll talk about them in a bit. But when you talk about the guys at the top and just who projects well, Dallas is going to come out ahead of a lot of these players. So as I go down the list in pricing, I start having more and more interest in the Seattle players. We talked about Charbonnet. He's not very expensive, but he just has the chance to get games scripted out a little more than the pass catchers. So I think I feel safer with Jackson Smith-Njigba and Lockett. And there's nothing wrong with Metcalf. He just comes in at a price point that's a little trickier to get than these players. And the target shares aren't really that different. They've basically doubled down on Jackson Smith-Njigba of late. He's not rotating as much anymore. It's basically when they run 3 wide receiver sets, it's going to be Metcalf, Lockett, and Smith-Njigba. So now with this role change, we're seeing Smith-Njigba as our most positively leveraged player on the slate. And that comes in both captain and utility. So I love using him. And I also love his price point. When you're jamming in Pollard, Dak, and CeeDee, Smith-Njigba is the cheapest Seattle guy that you feel really good about. So he's going to allow you to take a more balanced build where you don't end up with guys like Jalen Tolbert in your lineup, who you wouldn't be surprised if they got a 0. So I like Smith-Njigba the most of this group. Lockett would be second, and DK would be third. Nothing against DK. It's just a price thing.
Yeah, you make a great point about the captain spot, too, and just seeing where our Sims tool are for Jackson. I mean, he's right there at the top. Our top-rated ROI lineup has him at the captain spot, and you have that flexibility to build, especially with the bigger names on Dallas, where you're not, and again, Geno, the cost there. So it really expands your build, and he's not disappearing by any means. You don't have to worry about snap share or things along those lines. I think that's fantastic, especially because, as you mentioned, people are going to be racing to a more popular Metcalf and trying to work in that price and maybe squeeze or force in that price point versus just being able to build with a little more flexibility with Jackson at the captain spot. Seems like a really good smash spot for him tonight. I imagine that you're still going to get to him in the flex. We'll talk about Parkinson in the tight end spot in a sec, but it gives you a lot of flexibility to have a guy like Jackson on the slate, at least for Seattle.
I think it leads you to a different build too. When I look at the top stacks tool and the players we have over-owned, what I see is we have a lot of people probably jamming the 3 Cowboys studs and then still trying to get a player like DK Metcalf. So, I mean, DK Metcalf is going to be relatively owned tonight. But when you do that, you also have to jam in guys like Tolbert, and you have to go down to Parkinson and these value plays that don't project particularly well. So that is going to be something to monitor throughout the day. If this changes, then maybe I'd have more interest in a contrarian DK Metcalf. But right now, he's just not projecting to be that contrarian.
Yeah, and that's interesting that you don't have that. Well, I guess it makes sense. It's Showdown slate. I guess it does start to make sense when you talk through there. Are you going any deeper beyond these 3 guys? Are you looking at any long range? Probably not, I would imagine. But
probably not, but maybe. There's a couple injuries on Seattle that I don't think we're going to get updated till we get to 90 minutes before the game. One of them is D. Eskridge. We currently have him projected in. He matters more for like a Jake Bobo. If you take out D. Eskridge, Bobo maybe plays like 12 snaps. versus like 6 if De-Eskridge is in. I know we're talking like on the thinnest of margins, but these value plays actually do influence the slate because we have so many studs. You know, if you get a De-Eskridge out and Jake Bobo, his projection jumps, well, then maybe we do see positive leverage on DK Metcalf because now there's an avenue to get to him in addition to the Cowboys studs. So I do think this is worth monitoring. I kind of think De-Eskridge misses this game and then Bobo might project a little bit better, but we'll have to wait and see on this. Another reason to watch live before lock, of course. The tight end situation, I think Disley is going to play, which I think probably muddles things for like Parkinson. I mean, at the end of the day, Parkinson is $800. So even if he isn't a timeshare, what does he really have to do for your lineup? But I'm kind of just nervous about the Seattle tight end situation returning to a 3-way committee even more than it has been lately. And to be honest with you, I think I'd rather just go up to the mid-range and play like the Lockett builds, the Smith and Jigba builds, where you don't really have to punt as deep with these players in Seattle.
Yeah, it seems as Parkinson is that option, at least for our tool here, where, you know, as far as just sliding him in, as far as the highest ceiling and maybe the low-cost option. But I think from a build standpoint, you're right. You don't need to be in that spot necessarily. Again, it's not, it doesn't seem like it's a good or a bad. It seems like it's more of a choice, if that makes sense, as far as a left or right or direction. And I'm leaning with you in the sense of if you can build in a different way and still get to the same end here, you don't have to scrape. And again, Parkinson's clearly going to be the top of that barrel, but you don't have to scrape in that regard, especially if you're working a higher cost guy in the captain spot. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. It's a weird slate in that there's actually a decent amount of moving pieces, but you know, I still don't know if the moving pieces would change my mind. I'm with you where I kind of want to just not play a lot of these really volatile value plays, and I'd rather play 3 studs and then mix and match the mid-range value that we actually know is going to be on the field. Because, you know, if like Disley plays, which he did get in a full practice, I think he plays, do you really want to target Parkinson, who could very well end up with a 0? Or would you rather play like Smith and Jigba and, I don't know, a Charbonnet, where you know they're both on the field every single play? So I'm wrestling with it. I think I would rather do that, but we'll have to see. There's also some situations on Dallas like this too, where we'll have to wait for the late news. Weird late news slate. I feel like we don't get a lot of these in the current rendition of the NFL, but we have lately.
Yeah. Well, there wasn't anything to hold your breath about with the Bears and Vikings. It was just the game itself, whether or not you'd get a touchdown. Let's move. We'll hit the kickers and defense. Just want to remind you all, we'll talk a little bit about it throughout here as far as what we're doing at Underdog. We even have this free square. It's really awesome for Dak tonight. So we'll get you in. We'll match your first deposit, double actually your first deposit. So we used to just match over at Underdog. Now we're doubling and just use our code Stochastic. It's easy. It's simple. It's much easier to beat Underdog than it is these massive sports books. So that's why we want you in there. And we have tools. We have tools available for you on Stochastic. Odd Shopper, this new hub that we've revamped, has specific tools just to beat Underdog. So getting you in is the easy part. Winning is even easier. That's why we want you in there. And again, we'll match your first deposit. Double. I keep saying match because I'm used to that. This is much better. Doubling that first deposit. Kickers defense for Seattle. The defense is just, I mean, it's pretty much at a neutral spot here as far as the ROI that we have on our Sims tool. So clearly, short week offense is being predicted to boom for Dallas. It would not shock anybody in a contrarian league here if Dallas came out and, you know, struggled their way to maybe 17, 20 type points and a turnover for Dak, even though this game's at home, which kind of gives me a little pause in believing that. Like if the scenario was flipped, Matt, and this game's on the road, I think I could buy that. I don't. Seattle's going to have a lot. Doesn't mean that they can't do it at 3,400 though for the flex spot. Interested to see kind of where you're maneuvering the Seahawks defense and also the kicker spot.
Seahawks defense, I think I have a little more interest in than Dallas, and it has nothing to do with on-field football play. Obviously, a ton of respect for Dallas's defense, but they're now expensive. And man, I feel like at some point this run of just primetime defensive showdown, like being in the optimal lineup and winning in the captain spot sometimes has to end at some point. On the main slate, we've seen these elite defenses fail. It was just 2 weeks ago where Dallas was the most expensive defense, but I think they were playing Washington, if I'm not mistaken, against Sam Howell, where he takes 1,000,000 sacks. And they failed because they didn't have a defensive score. They had a lot of sacks, but they finished with like somewhere between 9 and 12 points, and other defenses had defensive touchdowns. So they were outscored. And they're at a price point now, which is really tricky. And I still think they're going to be owned. So honestly, I would rather pivot to Seattle, who's a defense I don't have as much respect for, but they played reasonably well. They're also much cheaper. And I don't see this defense being even half as much owned as the Cowboys. And all it takes is a defensive score. Dak has been turnover prone in the past. He's just played a very easy schedule and gotten past it with relative ease so far.
Myers, you think this is, I mean, it's a Thursday night. So I don't care if these teams are coming off buys, Thanksgiving, whatever. Thursday night football just screams under, kicks, boring, turn off the television. We getting to Myers?
I'm definitely going to get to Myers. I think this is the kind of slate where you can certainly play these kickers, and I would rather do that than play the scrubs. So again, I think builds that have like Smith and Jigba and Myers, or Smith and Jigba and Aubrey versus, an extra, I don't know, DK Metcalf and Bobo or something. I prefer the former, where you actually feel good about the players on the field and don't have a guy that could literally zero for you.
So I'm curious. Let's move on here. And again, the whole thing with Underdog, you see Mike has that up. We'll hit the Cowboys. But News God actually had me thinking about this with the whole thing with the beard. Who do you think would look the best or worst? And I think best and worst is best defined here as the same. Like if you put my beard on Raza or Ehrenberg, like who do you think it would look just the worst, but mainly the best, like the funniest it would be? Like I can't picture Ben walking around with like a massive beard on his face. Could you?
No, that's what I was going to say. The answer is Ben for me.
That's what we need. An AI generated picture of Ben Raza with my beard and to see what that looks like. I think he and Greg would definitely be the most, like Lofty's a hockey player. So if you add a beard to him, it would just look natural, right? And you've got a beard. I've seen Adam with a beard. I think it's just because he just forgot to shave for like 10 straight days. But, Engelman's always scrubbed out, isn't he? Like he's got scrubble like you and all.
Yeah,
Stubble,
he usually has
scrubble.
it.
Yeah.
I think Ben's the answer.
Okay. I think so too. Yeah, I agree with don't move to Texas. And I wonder why that is. Maybe that person's in Texas and is warning us. But Matt looks like he could grow a Viking beard. You absolutely look like. And you're in like the Wisconsin area too. So it's probably every other person you see probably has a Viking beard. Is that a fair stereotype of the region in which you live in?
There's a lot of beards. And yeah, when I don't shave, my beard basically goes up to my eyes. And I've been able to shave full beard since I was like 14. I don't know.
There you go. Oh man. All right, let's look at Dak here. The worst is they couldn't grow the connector. So we talked about Geno. There's definitely going to be a price difference for sure as far as with Dak captain and what have you. But again, you're at home. This is a beatable defense on the ground. I don't know how much that transfers up. We've seen this team just pound the ball to CeeDee Lamb. It's going to open up maybe something else, especially for a guy I would think like Brandon Cooks, who's negatively leveraged as far as our ROI is concerned, but we'll get to that. Dak, 16-5 DK in the captain spot. Seems like he'd be worth the spend up regardless of where you put him.
I think he's worth a spend up. Team total here is just so good. Don't think it really makes up for the difference in salary you've seen between Geno and Dak himself. DK tried. They made it at a point where I was considering Geno just for the salary savings, but it's not enough for me. And I mean, this goes back to the Vegas spread in total. When you got a team favored by 10 points, you're just leaving so much opportunity cost on the board by not rostering him. So honestly, I have a ton of interest in all three of the Dallas studs, Dak, CeeDee, and Tony Pollard. I think it just comes down to where you want to play them. Do you want to play one of them in the flex or in the captain? Which one is it in the captain you want? But right away, just strategy wise, if you're playing small field stuff, if you're playing cash on a showdown, I think you need all three of the Dallas studs. I think for captain, I'm probably going to go CeeDee Lamb over Dak, but it's razor close in my opinion. Those are the top two captains just because of how condensed it's gotten between Dak and CeeDee. The other receivers are rotating more. CeeDee's target share is to the moon in that he's playing like Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson. He deserves his target share. So yeah, just really hard not to roster him. I think in a vacuum, you forced me to pick one. I would go CeeDee captain over Dak. But Dak's still a really strong play, and you can build with him in multiple ways. So nothing against Dak, just would rather play him in the flex.
So big picture kind of talk here for the Cowboys when you're building with Dak and really this offense. How often, I mean, this would be a full contrarian game plan that would just have to be executed by what Seattle's doing. You wouldn't go into it. I mean, I have my issues with Mike McCarthy and that team down there, but I mean, nobody's this stupid in which they would go into a game plan and fade a guy like Lamb. I mean, the numbers would tell you that. But look, game plan, maybe Pete Carroll is not an idiot by any means. So maybe they devise a way to establish some pressure or just take away some deep spots, some middle spots. And now it's more of just about rushing the ball to Lamb and opening up some areas elsewhere. Where is that even a possibility to have a build where it's still Dak being productive, but you're leaving Lamb out of that lineup?
That will be very contrarian, definitely something for large fields. And I think when you're doing that, you're looking primarily at Brandon Cooks, who's negatively leveraged. That comes down to just pricing and his role in the offense. His price has come up after he scored and had a couple big weeks recently, but the volume hasn't really changed significantly. Everything is still flowing through CeeDee Lamb, and then it's just slim pickings for the players outside of that. But I have a little more confidence in Lamb versus like a Gallup or a Tolbert because the routes are still pretty consistent. 30 routes for Brandon Cooks on 35 dropbacks that only trailed CeeDee Lamb. So at the end of the day, you're not going to see the same target share, not even close, but he is out there a lot. For me, that's a large field tournament play. Definitely going to be hyper contrarian. And if you do something like a Dak captain to Cooks without CeeDee Lamb, I'm probably looking at a pretty chalky build around that because you are going to be extremely contrarian doing that.
Yeah, look, I get it. And it's not going to be, again, you see all of you brand new folks coming in, immediately hit that thumbs up button. And of course, make sure you're subscribed. We appreciate the chat. Keep it coming here. Anything that you have for Matt as we look early. Again, we have some injury news and some things happening around here. But yeah, that's the thing too, where you're going to have to force or just approach it with some more chalk to kind of get around the fact that you're negating Lamb. Again, that's not a popular build. I don't think that it's going to be one that you're going to get to a ton, but just to bring this up, especially in larger plays where you are looking at the just most obvious thing out there tonight, right? If I were to ask you, what's going to be the most obvious conclusion that you can reach tonight across the board? Dak Prescott's going to get the football to CeeDee Lamb. Like, that's the one thing we know, I think, more than anything.
Absolutely. Not even in question. At the end of the day with that, I think it comes down to, does like CeeDee get into the end zone? Because if CeeDee gets into the end zone, that's where he can start to bury you if you don't captain him. But say CeeDee has an awesome game and he goes like for 10, 120 scoreless, and it's Pollard that gets in the end zone. Or maybe Dak rushes one in from the 1 yard line. That's where the CeeDee captain builds go wrong, where you still want CeeDee, and I think you probably want him regardless unless you're playing Millie Maker size tournaments. It's does he get the scores? And that's where I think we can have a conversation with Pollard because if they get close to the end zone, Pollard's going to have a goal line role. Dak's not running as much as he has previously in his career, but QB sneak is as popular as ever. He could rush one in himself. And then you get the contrarian pass catchers, which are going to be relatively unknown in the captain spot. But I think it's a pretty nice segue to Pollard, who still has a really good role. And if CeeDee's not scoring the touchdowns, would you say Pollard is probably the second most likely to be scoring them in this offense? I think that's where I'm at.
Yeah, and I think actually you can make an argument, Matt. I'm glad you brought him up. You can make an argument that this is the game, especially with the matchup against Seattle, their run defense. This is the game where Pollard is more likely to get in, despite the target share, despite what we've seen just from CeeDee Lamb. I don't think it's a week-to-week thing that fluctuates. I think you need more of real close to perfect circumstances. But the need for Pollard to continue to establish some sort of resurgence, also this matchup against Seattle, also it's still being, and I get it, like they played on Thanksgiving, but you're still playing on Thursday. And these guys are ultimate creatures of habit, playing on Sunday, not just needing 7 days off. So it does make sense to kind of get in, get out with a strategy where you can pound the ball, and Pollard would be him. We know about Rico Dowdle being banged up. So I would say you can make a strong argument that this week Pollard actually stands an even greater chance. But if you don't like that argument, then you still have to concede what you said initially, which is it would be Pollard number 2. Long ways of saying, yes, you're right.
I think for, mid-sized tournament builds, Pollard's my favorite captain because of the touchdown expectation. He's also been playing better of late. I think a couple things go into that. One, their opponents have been bad. But 2, Pollard has run like wildly bad around the goal line this year, scoring touchdowns. He's had penalties that have brought back touchdowns. Other players, like even last week, Rico Dowdle caught in like a weird screen. Pollard had done a lot of the work on that drive, and it was just a random play where you're kind of slamming your head into the keyboard. Like how did Dowdle get the one play that mattered on that drive? But the efficiency's been better for Pollard too. So I don't think he's as much of a risk to come off the field for Dowdle as maybe we thought he was earlier in the year when that efficiency was really poor. Pollard's still an excellent pass catcher. Mike McCarthy's not doing a great job drawing up those plays, but you still would rather have a guy that's on the field on third downs versus, 2-down stiff like Derrick Henry. So I still like Pollard, and I think for mid-sized tournaments, he makes an excellent contrarian pivot in the captain spot, off Dak, off CeeDee.
How deep can you go here? You don't want to lead with it, right? But there's always a blowout sense. Look, they're at home. Seattle has been rough at times, and we don't want this. Nobody's rooting for a 42-16 football game. But how deep can you go here, even if it's more of a small, quick, low percentage, I should say, build where you're just playing the blowout factor or some depth here? And again, Dowdle's health is clearly the concern that you work around.
I think he's going to play tentatively again. You've got to watch live before lock because they'll have the definitive information on if he plays. But he's really expensive for the role he has. Unless you think he carves out more at the expense of Tony Pollard, I don't see how you can play him over like some of the kickers, the defenses. I'd rather find the salary. It's about $1,000 to get up to Jackson Smith and Jigba, or just go down and punt all the way. He's firmly stuck in this no man's land. And when you look at his role, it just doesn't make a lot of sense for Rico Dowdle on this slate. The number 3 pass catcher has come down to a pretty nasty timeshare between Michael Gallup, Jalen Tolbert, and then the occasional Kevontae Turpin. I think Tolbert is the most likely to succeed out of this group. Gallup's been bad. There's no way to put this. He's now getting benched for Tolbert. And then Turpin, he has like a weird gadgety role. We obviously know he's their kick returner. He has the unlikely range of outcomes that where he does return one. We've actually seen that this year. But people might click Turpin after he caught the garbage time touchdown last week. That was firmly in garbage time. He only played 5 offensive snaps. So I think Turpin's pretty thin, but Tolbert isn't an ascending role. He had more snaps than Michael Gallup last week. It's still close between those guys. So that's tricky. I guess the last thing to talk about is the tight end situation. And I do think there is a little bit of noise with Peyton Hendershot eligible to come off injured reserve. This is not something they have to do till 4 p.m. Eastern time, I believe. But if Hendershot comes off IR, this could muddle the situation even further, and you'll have to watch inactives because they've had 3 tight ends active. Sean McKeon's been on the field. He played 10 snaps last week. Luke Schoonmaker played 22. Jake Ferguson played 39. I think that gets a little wider in favor of Ferguson if the game's competitive. Again, they absolutely rolled Washington, so you saw their rookie Luke Schoonmaker play a decent amount last week. But who's inactive if they have Peyton Hendershot back up?
Yeah.
I'm not sure. So you're going to have to watch that. If Hendershot's active or something, he could be worth a dart throw way down in price point, and that would remove maybe one of the other tight ends. So, I mean, late new situation for sure there.
All right. Did we talk about, by the way, Cooks and Gallup, or did we just breeze by because of what's going on with CeeDee Lamb? I know we need to build a lineup. I got scolded for that on Monday. So I don't know which one of you two dimed me out, but you got to build a lineup. No, I kid, of course. Neither one of you. These are two of the most tight-lipped individuals. That's what I was saying. Like, if I could trust anybody to keep that I just committed a crime quiet, it would be Matt and Mike. All right. Lofty'd be out there. Oh, man, this guy, he just like Ben. You don't trust Ben, right? Because everybody thinks the quiet guy. You two, I know would take it to their graves. So no, by all means. Oh, we did speak on Cooks and Gal. News God is always here. That's right. That's right. Marcos is just getting to the beard conversation. So we appreciate you, Marcos, being here. And by all means, the fact that you're 15 minutes behind is never an issue. All right. The fact that you're here means more. So defense, we talked a little bit about this. I just wanted to make sure. Appreciate News got in the house. I know we talked so much about Lamb there. I didn't want to breeze over Cooks. Had an interesting play there for Cooks on the betting angle. But let's just wrap up Dallas. We'll build a lineup. I want to throw a couple of anytime touchdowns at you, see what you feel. Dallas defense, especially in the backdrop of Seattle. You mentioned getting to Seattle a little bit more, and also the same strategy, I would imagine, with the kicker position versus getting to more of a scrub build. That would assume apply here. Okay.
The one thing I'm running into with Dallas is, man, like, so this is kind of me maybe outsmarting myself. Our tools are extremely smart. We have an ownership algorithm, which is extremely predictive. But at the end of the day, I'm looking at these previous showdown slates where constantly low scoring defensive captains get there. I'm wondering if Dallas might get steamed up throughout the day because we're not in love with the value. When you get to this mid-range, it's very easy to tell yourself a story. This phenomenal Cowboys pass rush. They're going up against a banged up Seattle O-line. Geno's injured on the other side. Deron Bland is returning pick sixes routinely, almost weekly at this point, breaking records. Do more people click on Dallas's defense than they should? I think that's in the range of outcomes. So I find myself getting to Aubrey more, to Myers, and even Seattle's defense in this range, or flat out just going to Smith and Jigba, who's cheaper than the Cowboys defense wildly. That's where I'm at. I think they might come in a little overowned. I'm going to monitor this closely throughout the day and see what our tools say closer to lock.
Awesome, man. Before we start building here and just looking at what the Sims have, is there anything else just overall in this game on this slate? Really good mention of what you said as far as like D. Eskridge and Bobo and seeing something along those lines. So if it's injury, if it's just want to reiterate something about Jason Myers, or if it's just something big picture. Look at that, by the way. Did you see? I see
Ben?
The beauty. That's the thing. Like that, the beauty of working with Mike is that you know how ridiculous a comment you make, he will have a picture up to represent it. That looks scary. I don't want to see that.
Yeah, I'm a little surprised. Ben looks like a pure mountain man.
So somebody on the chat actually brought this up. What do you think looks worse? Would it be Neil Orfield without that mountain man beard, like clean shaven Neil, or big beard Ben?
I think I saw Neil at least with a much shorter beard one time. I think he made a mistake trimming it. I could be wrong on this, but I'm pretty sure I've seen that, and it was jarring.
Oh, my goodness. I love it, man. I love it. All right. Outside of me growing my beard back and killing this conversation here, anything big picture that you just wanted to clean up before we build a lineup? And if you don't, that's fine. We talked a lot about this game, and I think especially on the Seattle side.
I think the only other player that we should talk about a little bit is Jake Ferguson, who might be sneaky in this range that includes Lockett, Charbonnet, and then he's a little more expensive than the defenses and Jackson Smith and Jigba. He played only 39 snaps last week out of 54. And some people might look at that, think it's a role reduction with Schoonmaker playing basically a season high, but he still ran 30 routes on 35 dropbacks. This looks to me like they just pulled him when the game was out of hand to get their young rookie tight end Schoonmaker some extra reps. Like, he still had a massive route share. He was in there when the game was actually closer and important. I think Ferguson's fine. He'll be another player. I'm just watching the ownership closely. If the narrative spins and people start to think he's overowned because that snap share was reduced, I'll probably play more of him, and vice versa if he ends up overowned. So just another guy I'm watching closely.
All right, let's do it, my friend. You ready? We'll build a lineup here.
Let's do it. DK?
Yeah, I feel like that's where you would prefer to build, right?
Yeah, that's what Laffy and I have done.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm not here to disrupt anything. All right. Contrary to what people in the chat believe, I'm here to just make this as seamless of a trend. And don't worry, Laffy, like technically Laffy is back, right? Did he beat the under on that? I think he's doing
He did a show.
Okay, but it's a live show, right? Like I'm not going to count. Okay, so this does like a 5-minute video or his best bets for the weekend where it's just him sitting down in some corner of his house. Like that doesn't count, Matt. I'm talking full on show he's got to do.
Yeah, it's like the sports book when you're betting an over, your guy plays a snap and gets hurt. They still count that. Laffy is not getting out of this on a technicality.
I love it, man. I love it. See, you hold him to the fire as well. That's the beauty of it, man. Yeah, let's build DK. And I just ran a sim here as well. So Mike's gonna have up our Sims tool. It's just amazing what we have. You see the results of it. I don't need to hit you over the head with it by any means. It's just I don't know why you wouldn't be using it. You can use it for the NBA. We have the late swap. All of that is here. So with that said, it seems like we're down to all right. Let's look at this. It seems like the best Seattle captain would be Jackson. And then we kind of have an option of maybe Dak, Lamb, or Pollard as far as a captain option for Dallas. What are you thinking here?
Yeah, I think all those make a lot of sense just based on the context of the slate. Say we're building for like a midfield tournament in terms of sizing. I think Pollard is the most interesting player to go in his price range.
Okay. So we'll keep Pollard in as the captain.
Yeah.
All right, sweet. Now it gets interesting, right? Because what's the story? How does the game flow work with Pollard as the captain? Is Pollard just benefiting from the matchup and amassing a bunch of yards, and we're basically counting on at least one touchdown here? And or is this just an onslaught where you think you're going to start CeeDee Lamb? Like let's get that out of the way. I don't want to bury the lead. Is this a Cowboys heavy stack for you now where it's let's get Lamb in there. Let's get Prescott in there right away along with Pollard?
Yeah, so you bring up an excellent point. I would certainly consider game script, especially on today, because there's so many ways this game could go with a 10-point spread. If it plays to that, I mean, you're still likely going to have Dallas projecting well. If it goes beyond that and Dallas wins this game by like 17 or something, that's where the onslaughts really come into play. But if Seattle keeps this within 10, I mean, you're probably going to want something closer to a 3-3, maybe a 4-2 build where this comes in on both sides. I think playing to game script, we still probably want like CeeDee in our lineup, regardless of how this plays out. You know, if it's closer than we expect, right on the 9.5 or even further in Dallas's favor, like CeeDee probably has something to do with it regardless. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would say right. So you actually laid out a scenario where Lamb is better put in the flex spot to where it is Pollard either vulturing a touchdown on the goal line or just simply CeeDee Lamb is productive between, I don't even say the 20s, but the 10s, like the entire football field, but doesn't, you can't ignore that level of productivity. So yeah, Lamb has to get in there. But again, this is where I go back to the initial question. Are we just ignoring Dak Prescott in a game in which Pollard has 3 touchdowns on the ground, 85 yards, Lamb has 10 grabs for 90 yards, but doesn't have a touchdown, and Dak throws for, maybe 1 touchdown to Jake Ferguson?
That's a situation where you could leave Dak out. Again, I think for cash games, small field tournaments, you just want to start with Pollard, Lamb, Dak. Doesn't matter who you captain. I would prefer CeeDee or Dak in the captain spot. But once we get larger in terms of field size from there, that's where I think the things you're laying out, where we need to be very cognizant of specific game flows and scores in games and who's doing what. Because if Pollard scores 2, CeeDee has his 120 scoreless, Dak throws for like 250 with 1 score to Jake Ferguson, he might not be optimal depending on what Geno and the Seattle studs do. So I could see leaving him out of a build like this. I don't think it's absolutely necessary to play him, especially the larger you go in tournaments. But for cash games, I would put him in. I'll defer to you on how we want to treat this build moving forward.
No. I look. I don't want to be the
We
guy
can
jamming
go
in.
back and forth. It doesn't have to be me building a whole lineup.
No,
You
I know.
can
I
put
know.
some guys into as well.
Look, I think Jackson is the guy I want to target, knowing that we've just gone heavy with three big name guys for Dallas, and I think that's going to give us some breathing room as well as the productivity is there. So Smith and Jigba for sure would be somebody that I would throw into this build here.
I love
You
Smith
okay
and
with that?
Jigba.
Okay.
Absolutely no pushback with Smith and Jigba. The guy's awesome.
All right, so we've got Pollard at the captain spot, Lamb right now, Prescott. Those are the big hitters for Dallas. We just threw Smith and Jigba in there. Scrolling back up, Mike, if you can, just to kind of go back to the top. Now it gets a little interesting with where else we want to add someone in Seattle. Like we're going to be able to afford. Well, okay. Here's a question for you. Would you rather have in this build, would you rather have a guy like Tyler Lockett or Brandon Cooks?
I think I would rather have Tyler Lockett.
So let's add Lockett. But you understand why I ask in the sense of Cooks, like the increase in just looks and the fact that he could easily be the second receiver scoring tonight, if not even getting that touchdown from Lamb with all the focus on Lamb. So, all right, now we're down to 500. So we've overspent, we've over budgeted here. So let's get Lockett away and move him more. See, that's why we need you, man, to say we can't afford Tyler Lockett. All right, so let's bounce Lockett out of there and go a little bit lower. I mean, we've got a 7,700 average here. So oh no, remaining. I'm sorry. I looked at the wrong number. We're at 38. So we've got to get creative here. We've got to get creative. Do you want to go just kicker? Do you want to go?
You can play Aubrey for sure. You can also do stars and scrubs. Parkinson's still pretty positively leveraged for us.
800. Yeah.
And we have Disley in. If you go Parkinson, you can play like a Charbonnet, you can play a Ferguson, something like that. I also do like the kicker route. If you play the kicker, you're looking probably at something like Aubrey Tolbert or Aubrey Bobo, something like that. In this particular build, I think I prefer the stars and scrubs where we go Parkinson. And then, I don't know, do you have a preference between like Charbonnet and Ferguson for this build?
Before that, real quick, I think so, but you're definitely going Aubrey over Myers?
I would, yes.
Okay. So we could theoretically get Aubrey and I think I actually think Charbonnet if I could here.
With Charbonnet, we're going to have to punt all the way down to Parkinson.
Right, which I don't think is a terrible, well, it removes the kicker element here, but I don't think we're really building for kicks, at least with Dallas, with Pollard, Lamb, Prescott. It would make sense that you now have two, like Parkinson is there just because we have to punt. But both Smith and Jigba and Charbonnet, at least you can make arguments, are involved in this game if, in fact, Seattle's down 10, 13, 17 points, where even Charbonnet is going to be somewhat, from a pass catching standpoint, not heavy, but that's my lean. Building that way, the only other thing would be Ferguson and Aubrey. No, we couldn't fit that in either. It
would have to be Ferguson and Parkinson still too.
Yeah. So I would defer to Charbonnet here only because we've gone so heavy at top with Dallas, but I think that's fine, actually. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with you. To me, a build like this plays a little more back and forth, maybe to the spread or a little closer to it, maybe with an over in mind. We're lacking the kickers, and this likely would need some scoring. At least Seattle would have to do like their part to get Smith and Jigba and Charbonnet both there in this build, I think.
All right. Awesome, man. Awesome. So a lot's going to happen today. Live before lock. Make sure you pay attention as we get closer. A lot of injury stuff that could sneak out. Thanks to Matt there for bringing up even as deep as we get with Bobo or whatever we're waiting on here, Geno, and just the concern about injury overall. Make sure you're following along as well at Matt_Gajewski at Shander Show for me. Thanks to Mike Lawrence, as always, for producing. Don't worry. I see Lofty at least will be back next week. So You got through it, man, at the very least. No more beer talk. But to be fair, he talks about way more spaced out shit than I do.
Yeah, I don't remember the name of the gentleman that had that comment. Respect to you. I get it. All business, no nonsense. A lot of times I'm like that too. But occasionally, the back and forth banter is good. Build some rapport. It's exciting for the chat.
Absolutely, my friend. Always appreciate being able to do that with you, Matt. Thanks to everybody out there. Make sure you hit the thumbs up button, subscribe, anything. Real quick, I had Pollard, Cooks, and Smith and Jigba as anytime touchdowns tonight. But I might put them all together.
I haven't seen. What was that?
I might put them all together and just be greedy and blow my money on a parlay.
I like those. I think my two favorites would be Pollard and Smith and Jigba, assuming the number's pretty generous on Smith and Jigba.
Yeah, plus 350 I found on FanDuel. I have to check Odd Shopper and make sure I'm not getting ripped off. But, 3.5 to 1 seemed like a decent play there. All right, brother.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
Always a pleasure. Remember Underdog. You just saw that right there from Matt as well. We're going to double, or from Mike, pardon me. We're going to double your first deposit. Use code Stochastic. That's all I got, man. Anything else you want to get out? It's all yours, Matt.
A lot of college football content this weekend for conference championships. If that's your flavor, come check it out. It's going to be fun. Otherwise, thank you for being here. Let's take something down tonight.
Love it. See ya.